Think about the last time someone smiled at you. Not a polite smile, a real one. The kind that comes suddenly, unexpectedly. The kind that catches you off guard and pulls something out of you before you even decide how to respond. And right there, in the hollow of that smile, two small indentations pressed into the skin of their cheeks. For a fraction of a second, the world felt warmer than it was a moment before. You felt something. Something you didn't ask to feel. Something your brain produced before you could think. That feeling has a name in neuroscience. It is called the baby schema response. And the fact that two tiny pockets of skin, caused by a muscle variation that science technically classifies as a developmental defect, can trigger it in a fully grown adult across every culture on Earth, in every language, in every era of recorded human history. That is what scientists have spent decades trying to explain. They finally have, and what they found is not just a story about a charming facial feature. It is a story about what happens inside a human body before birth, about the molecular machinery that builds a face during the most delicate weeks of fetal development, about genes that should have been eliminated by evolution but weren't, about why the human brain is hardwired to feel something specific when it sees a dimple, and why that response, running completely beneath conscious awareness, has shaped human attraction, human culture, and human psychology for tens of thousands of years. This is the genetic mystery behind Dimples, and it starts in the womb in the 7th week of pregnancy. In a biological event so small it is invisible to the naked eye, but so consequential that its effects show up every time someone smiles at you and something changes in your chest before you can stop it. Close your eyes and think about the face of someone you love. Not what they look like still, looking at a photograph. Think of them in motion. Think of them laughing. Think of what their face does in the moment before they start to laugh. The way it rearranges itself, the way something in their expression opens. That motion, that opening, that is the zygomaticus major muscle doing its job. The zygomaticus major is the primary muscle of the human smile. It originates on the cheekbone, the zygomatic arch, and runs diagonally downward and inward, inserting at the corner of the mouth. When it contracts, it pulls the corner of the mouth upward and outward. It is the specific muscle responsible for the shape that every culture on Earth recognizes as happiness. Every genuine smile, in every human being who has ever lived, is fundamentally the contraction of this one muscle. In most people, the zygomaticus major runs as a single undivided bundle from the cheekbone to the mouth. But in some people, it doesn't. During fetal development, because cheek dimples result from a muscular variation that occurs during fetal development, they are sometimes referred to as a birth defect. The zygomaticus major splits. This bifid muscle originates as a single structure from the zygomatic bone. As it travels anteriorly, it then divides at the subzygomatic hollow into superior and inferior muscle bundles. The superior bundle inserts at the usual position above the corner of the mouth. The inferior bundle inserts into the modiolus below the corner of the mouth, and here is the crucial detail. The inferior bundle was observed in several specimens to have a dermal attachment along its mid-portion, which tethers the overlying skin. That tether, that single strand of tissue attaching the lower bundle of a split muscle to the skin above it. That is a dimple. Not a gift, not a special design, a tether. When the muscle contracts during a smile, it pulls the tethered skin inward, creating the indentation that centuries of poets called a sign of beauty, and that biologists now call a dermal tethering effect of the bifid zygomaticus major. The science classified it as a defect. The human heart classified it as enchanting. And the distance between those two classifications is one of the most fascinating stories in the whole of human biology. So when does this happen? When exactly does this split occur? This small departure from the standard blueprint that produces the feature that has been called a divine blessing, a sign of good fortune, a mark of beauty in cultures from ancient India to modern Hollywood? How early in the story of a human life does this decision get made? It happens in the 7th to 8th week of pregnancy. The embryo, at this stage, is roughly the size of a raspberry. It weighs less than a gram. Its face is just beginning to emerge from the cellular scaffolding of the neural crest, a population of extraordinarily powerful cells that migrate from the developing spine to the front of the head and build, from nothing, the entire architecture of the human face, the nose, the jaw, the cheekbones, the muscles of expression. Everything that will eventually become the face another person looks at and feels something about, all of it originates in these traveling cells, in these 8 critical weeks, in a cascade of genetic instructions so precisely timed and sequenced that the smallest disruption produces features that will remain visible for a lifetime. And it is during this window when the zygomaticus major is forming for the first time that the split either happens or it doesn't. Anatomically, cheek dimples are thought to be caused by a double or bifid zygomaticus major muscle, whose fascial strands insert into the dermis and cause a dermal tethering effect. The moment when the muscle fails to form as a single undivided structure. That is, a moment that happens before the mother feels the baby move, before anyone in the world knows the child exists in any fully formed sense, before a name is chosen, before a face is imagined, before anyone can anticipate what this person will look like when they laugh. The dimple is already there, already decided, already woven into the muscle architecture of a face that is still weeks from looking like a face at all. Does that not make you feel something? That the feature which will one day stop a stranger in their tracks, that will make someone look twice, that will become one of the things the people who love this person love most, exists already, perfectly formed, in a fetus the size of a raspberry? Now here is where the science becomes genuinely complex. Because if dimples are caused by a specific structural variation in a specific muscle, and they are, then why is the inheritance pattern so maddeningly inconsistent? The occurrence of dimples on the face is an autosomal dominant trait. Dominant. In genetics, that means a single copy of the variant gene, inherited from just one parent, is enough to produce the trait. You don't need two copies. One is sufficient, which means that statistically, if one of your parents has dimples, you have a higher than chance probability of having them too. But ask any family of dimpled people and they will tell you it doesn't work that cleanly. One parent has deep, constant dimples. One child gets them. Another doesn't. A grandchild gets them, even though neither parent has them. A child is born with one dimple on the left cheek and none on the right. Twins with identical DNA can have different dimple expression. How does a dominant trait behave this unpredictably? Because the genetics of dimples is not actually a simple one-gene story. Several genes play a role in determining whether an individual will have dimples. The most well-known gene associated with dimples is the PAX3 gene, PAX3. A paired box transcription factor, a type of master regulator gene that doesn't build physical structures itself, but controls whether dozens of other genes are switched on or off during development. PAX3 is active in premigratory neural crest and early myogenic progenitors, exactly the cells that migrate to form the face in those critical early weeks. It doesn't just influence one feature. It orchestrates the development of facial muscles, connective tissue, and the intricate interplay between them that determines the precise angle at which the zygomaticus major will form, whether it will split, and if it splits, whether the lower bundle will attach itself to the skin. This gene is involved in the development of facial muscles, and variations in the PAX3 gene can influence the formation of dimples. While genetics plays a significant role, it is not the sole determinant of whether a person will have dimples. Not the sole determinant. That qualifier is the most honest sentence in the entire scientific literature on dimples, and it opens onto a question that researchers have not yet fully answered. If the trait is dominant, if PAX3 variations are involved, if the muscle split happens during a defined developmental window, why does the outcome vary so dramatically, even within the same family, sometimes even between identical twins? Research into the genetics of dimples is limited. However, reports of multiple members of the same family having similar types of dimples do suggest genes could be a factor. The careful hedging in that sentence is significant. This is the BBC quoting a consultant maxillofacial surgeon, not a fringe source, not a popular science blog, but a peer-reviewed clinician. And the most definitive statement available is that genes could be a factor. In 2025, with the entire human genome sequenced, with CRISPR technology capable of editing individual base pairs, with genetic research producing breakthroughs that would have seemed magical a decade ago, we still cannot say with certainty exactly which genes, in exactly which combination, with exactly which environmental interactions during fetal development, produce a dimple. Why? Because the face is one of the most genetically complex structures in the entire human body. More genes are expressed in the development of the human face than in virtually any other organ system. The face is the endpoint of thousands of developmental decisions, made in sequence across weeks, each one influenced by the one before it. The zygomaticus major doesn't form in isolation. It forms in the context of a jaw already taking shape, cheekbones already calcifying, connective tissue already migrating, skin already layering over muscle in patterns dictated by hundreds of simultaneous genetic instructions. Whether the muscle splits and whether the split produces a visible dimple depends on a combination of factors so intricate that geneticists are still mapping it, and that incompleteness, that scientific humility in the face of a feature so small and so common, is one of the most honest and important things the research reveals. But here is what the research has explained definitively. Here's the part that was genuinely mysterious for centuries and is now finally understood. The question was never just how dimples form. The question was why they matter so much. Why, across every culture in recorded human history, in societies that share almost nothing else, language, religion, governance, diet, architecture. The response to a dimpled smile is almost universal. Why does the feature that science calls a developmental variation produce a response in the human brain that feels, from the inside, almost like falling? People with dimples are consistently rated as more attractive, approachable, and trustworthy across multiple psychological studies. The effect ties into baby schema, a set of youthful features the brain automatically reads as harmless and endearing. First impressions form in roughly 100 milliseconds, meaning dimples can influence judgment before conscious evaluation kicks in. 100 milliseconds, less than a tenth of a second. The human brain has already formed an impression, already classified a dimpled face as warmer and more trustworthy before the conscious mind has done anything at all. The judgment happens in the same neural systems that respond to infants: rounded cheeks, large eyes, small noses, features that the brain has been trained by millions of years of evolution to respond to with warmth, protection, and openness. Dimples share the visual vocabulary of youth, and the brain responds accordingly. The same baby schema circuitry that makes you coo over a puppy or an infant's face is quietly triggered by a dimple. A muscular quirk gets processed by the brain as a signal of warmth and harmlessness, no different from big eyes or a round face, and there is more. Dimples do something specific to a smile that goes beyond neoteny, beyond the simple triggering of youth recognition circuits. Dimples do something specific to smiles. They exaggerate the visual signal of genuine emotion. A smile with dimples looks more animated because the cheek moves more dramatically, creating a stronger, more legible expression of happiness. Facial expression. Researchers have long distinguished between smiles that reflect real enjoyment and ones performed for social reasons. Dimples feed into this snap judgment because they soften facial angularity and enhance the expressiveness of the smile. This is the biological reason dimples feel honest. When the zygomaticus major contracts and pulls skin through a tether, the movement is larger, more visible, more dramatic than an undimpled smile. It signals not just happiness, but uninhibited happiness. Happiness that can't be politely managed, that overflows into the architecture of the face. The brain reads that overflow as authenticity, as lack of deception, as someone who is genuinely, unguardedly pleased, and that, in the ancient social mathematics of the human brain, is one of the most powerful signals a face can send. Consider what this means for a moment. Consider the full arc of what happens when you see someone with dimples smile at you. In the first 100 milliseconds, your brain registers the visual pattern of the dimple and activates your baby schema response. Before you think anything, before you form any deliberate judgment, warmth, harmlessness, approachability, these categories are already being applied. Then in the next fraction of a second, your brain registers the animation of the smile itself, the movement of the dimple deepening, the cheek pulling inward, the expression becoming more exaggerated than a non-dimpled smile would be, and classifies it as genuine, authentic, unperformed. And then, in the next second or two, your conscious mind arrives, surveys what your unconscious brain has already decided, and calls it attraction, or charm, or beauty, or joy, depending on the context. The entire sequence takes less than 3 seconds, and all of it, every step, was set in motion during the 7th week of a pregnancy, when a single muscle in a raspberry-sized embryo failed to form as a single undivided structure. When it split into 2 bundles, and one bundle attached itself to the skin above it, creating a tether that will remain in that face for the entire duration of its owner's life. The person with dimples did not choose them. They were written into the face before the face was a face, and you did not choose your response to them. In India, dimples are associated with divine blessings and playfulness. In Indian culture, dimples hold deep cultural significance. They are often associated with beauty, charm, and good fortune. Historically, dimples have been depicted in ancient Indian literature and art as symbols of grace and allure. Haitian mothers gently form indents into newborns' cheeks, in hopes of molding dimples into the child's face. Haitian mothers pressing their fingers into the cheeks of their newborns, trying to create what the genetics decided before birth, whether to give. That image carries something enormous. It is a mother looking at her child and wanting for them the thing that the world will respond to with warmth, not because she has studied neuroscience, Not because she understands the zygomaticus major, or the baby schema response, or the dermal tethering effect of a bifid muscle, but because she has watched, across her whole life, what happens when a person smiles with dimples. She has felt it herself, and she wants her child to have that power. She doesn't know she is trying to replicate a fetal developmental variation. She just knows it is beautiful, and she wants it for her baby, and her hands are doing what her instincts are telling them to do. That is the cultural dimension of dimples. That is what it looks like when biology becomes belief. The genetic picture is still not completely resolved. Scientists are honest about that. There are many misconceptions surrounding dimple inheritance, with some sources claiming the dimple gene is located on chromosome 5. However, the body of literature regarding dimple inheritance isn't particularly strong. Research suggests that the gene for cheek dimples is located on chromosome 5, while chin dimples may be influenced by a gene on chromosome 16. But the confidence level for these chromosomal assignments is not as high as it is for other better studied traits. The research is real. It is peer-reviewed. But it is also incomplete, contested in parts, and ongoing. What science knows for certain is the anatomy. The bifid, zygomaticus major, the dermal tether, the mechanism of formation during fetal development. What science knows with high confidence is the neural response, the baby schema activation, the enhanced authenticity signal, the 100-millisecond pre-conscious judgment. What science is still working on is the complete genetic architecture, the precise combination of genes, alleles, and developmental timing that determines whether any given child will be born with the muscle variation that produces a dimple. The prevalence of the bifid zygomaticus major variant was most prominent in the American subgroup at 34%, followed by the Asian subgroup at 27.4% and the European subgroup at 12.3%. Those numbers tell a story about population genetics, about the different frequencies of muscle variation across ethnic groups, about how the anatomical substrate for dimples varies by geography in ways that nobody yet fully understands. Why would Americans have nearly 3 times the rate of bifid zygomaticus major as Europeans? What migration patterns, what founder effects, what genetic drift produced that distribution? The answers are not yet written. The research is still being done. In some individuals, dimples present in childhood may fade as the facial muscles and skin elasticity change with age. A child born with dimples may lose them in adulthood as subcutaneous fat redistributes and the skin above the muscle changes in thickness and elasticity. The tether is still there in the muscle, but the skin above it has changed enough that the indentation is no longer visible. The dimple is gone, but it was never really the dimple that was gone. It was the conditions that allowed the tether to show through. This is why dimples can seem to appear and disappear, why a woman who had them at 20 may not have them at 40, why a child who didn't seem to have them may develop them as the face loses its baby fat. The anatomy is constant. The visibility is variable. It is believed that around 20 to 30% of the world's population has cheek dimples, 2 to 3 people out of every 10, common enough to be seen regularly, rare enough that when you see them, they register. That particular frequency, present but not universal, may itself be part of why they capture attention. Too common and they would be invisible, unremarkable. Too rare and they would be strange, off-putting. But at 20 to 30%, they are precisely common enough to be familiar and rare enough to be noticed. The brain registers them as a recognizable variant, not an anomaly, and the response, warmth, openness, attraction, fires cleanly without the confusion that comes with an unfamiliar stimulus. There is something almost calibrated about that frequency, as if the distribution of a developmental muscle variation somehow landed at exactly the right rate to produce maximum social response. Of course, that is not what happened. The frequency is the product of genetics, drift, and developmental chance, not design. But the effect is as if someone had calculated exactly how often dimples should appear in a population to produce the maximum warmth response in the people who observe them. That is the difference between the way biology feels and the way biology works. It feels intentional. It feels designed. Every culture that has ever called dimples a divine blessing was responding to exactly that feeling. The sense that something so consistently beautiful and so consistently received with warmth must have been placed there on purpose. It wasn't. It was placed there by a split in a muscle during the 7th week of fetal development, by a gene variant whose precise chromosomal address science is still working to confirm, by a neural response to youth and authenticity that evolution built into the human brain over millions of years for reasons that had nothing to do with beauty and everything to do with survival. And yet, the woman whose dimples appear when she laughs, the one whose smile you saw and felt something before you could stop it, she did not earn that feature. She did not cultivate it. She did not choose it. It happened to her in a moment so early in her existence that she had no existence yet, in any meaningful sense. A small variation in a muscle that was just beginning to form, in a face that was just beginning to be a face, in a womb that was still learning how to sustain a life. That is the actual story behind Dimples. That is what the science says. A developmental variant, a muscle that split, a strand of tissue that attached to the skin, an event that happened in the dark, in the 7th week of pregnancy, with no audience and no intention. And yet, when that person smiles at you, when the muscle contracts and the skin pulls inward and the cheek folds around that small hollow, something happens in your brain in the first 100 milliseconds that all the scientific explanation in the world cannot fully flatten. Something that has been happening between human beings for as long as human beings have been watching each other. Something that 20 to 30% of the population carries in the muscles of their face as a fetal souvenir. Something that Haitian mothers press into the cheeks of their newborns trying to give them, and that Indian literature has called grace for thousands of years, and that neuroscience now calls baby schema activation. And that you, if you are being honest, call something entirely different, something quieter and more personal, something you felt before you thought, in the first fraction of a second, before the science began and the words ran out.